So you're looking at this slide and there's an artist with paint. Scott knows that I've referred to myself as a business artist because I really do feel that this type of work is very left brain, right brain. You have to have this artistry in considering what you want to design for your future. So to create culture, and it was said early on, it's not an accident, it forms no matter what. So to create a thriving company culture by design, it is like a painting. And you really do need to have a vision in mind and be intentional with what you're trying to create. And that means even choosing your ingredients wisely and devoting the time you need, setting aside the time to bring it to life. And when it's designed, it's never done, right? It's going to need the love and care to keep it shine and brilliance. And so we're going to talk about that. So here's the dilemma we have with culture and why it ends up being such a hot topic. We know that businesses are developing strategies and plans to deliver results all the time. And I'm going to pretty much guess that you've done a lot of that work. And it sounds like even the topic from last week was on strategic planning. And then you're out there competing for business and talent. Companies are doing it all the time. But culture isn't part of the strategy very often. And it's often overlooked, misunderstood, or undervalued. And ineffective culture can limit the potential of a company and even kill it entirely. So you have a choice, right? Do you include culture into your strategy or do you ignore it? And you're all founders of very mission-oriented businesses. And I know you're investing your heart and your soul and your sweat into creating a beautiful business. And that deeply personal mission and that inspiration and all of that is from the ground up. So it's a really valuable time to think about where culture comes to play in your journey. So I'm going to share a framework and examples that will help you on that journey. But I want to start with a story. When I was reflecting on preparing for today, most of my favorite experiences working for companies have been startups. And whether it was Prana that was kind of in its early phase or another story that I'm about to share with you, I've loved working with founders at these beginning phases to help create this culture that was so connected to the business. And early in my career, I didn't even realize what I was actually doing, that it was part of this bigger culture strategy, but it really was. So here's an example of a story I had with this rapidly growing and successful restaurant company. When I first started, they already had a couple of restaurants and they were thriving. And they had significant plans to grow even more. So I partnered with that CEO and they did have a leadership team at the time. So granted, they were bigger than what you have now. But we went through an exercise to define its vision, mission, and values to serve as its roadmap for growth and success. And we created and led with really simple yet inspiring vision to grow the people and grow the business. And a clear mission that you can see here, and also these rock solid values, which we also translated into clearly articulated behavioral expectations that the employees could easily understand. Now, this work isn't a marketing exercise. It wasn't thinking about the customer. It was thinking about the internal, being of this organization and what they wanted to create. And we had a fanatical culture in a positive way. Employees would say they bleed black and yellow, which were the company colors. In fact, these are pictures of it, but I literally have this original career roadmap back in the day when this was created. It was family owned, founder owned, and there was extraordinary levels of teamwork, very entrepreneurial, lots of hard work, and incredibly fun. Super fast paced, very fast growth. And we made sure the culture and all the people and management practices were aligned and linked. So everything from hiring, because one day you'll get to a place where you want to hire some team members, to compensation, you need to figure out how you're paying them. all of that we designed to mirror and reinforce the culture and behaviors that we knew we needed to make this business successful. So as you can see from this slide, we got specific about what those values were and got descriptive, even using verbs, of what it looked like in action so employees would know how to live them. So for example, the value of family transcended into how the company worked as a larger team and fed the larger team spirit. Managers, I don't know if any of you have had restaurant experience, but sometimes sharing resources across restaurants isn't the norm. You're kind of focused on your own restaurant. Here, the manager shared team members across locations depending on what another location needed. And it really was about the bigger family and team, not just that one restaurant. And the bonus programs we structured to reward that teamwork and sharing of resources. So instead of bonuses that were tied only to that assigned restaurant, team members shared in both the individual restaurant and the overall market performance. And the bonus criteria also emphasize customer satisfaction with quantifiable survey data from customers, as well as financial KPIs like sales and controllable expenses. So it was really, really clear where the customer stood as far as the values of the restaurant. And then the culture we fostered supported the growth of more restaurants and exceptional results, raving and loyal fans. They even had their own fan page. Financial results, people results, employee retention was really high. And that's unusual in restaurants too. It's well above industry benchmarks. Manager turnover in restaurants is normally over 50%. And here we kept it under 15. And hourly turnover is normally over 100%, sometimes as high as 300%. And we kept it under 50%. And part of the success formula of this growth was its culture and the commitment to that from leadership, and overall the strategies we put in place that was connected with the business strategy. So this company performed really, really well. And then the time seemed right for the founders to sell. And it was acquired by a company that owned large national restaurant chains. And this is where the story actually takes a turn. And acquisitions are not rare. We hear about them all the time, but successful ones actually are. According to the Harvard Business Review in 2019, between 70 and 90% of mergers and acquisitions fail. 70 to 90%. The common root of these failures can be connected to a lack of understanding of company culture, which was the secret sauce that made it successful in the first place. So in this case, I totally saw it coming, and the fundamental philosophies were completely misaligned. This acquisition led to changes in the organizational structure first, again, and that's not uncommon. Functions like accounting and IT were eliminated and absorbed by the new company. The biggest shift that I predicted would unravel the secret sauce started with a change in the compensation philosophy. Behind a compensation philosophy is a leadership philosophy. We're going to talk more about that. The two are intertwined. So this new company expected district managers and general managers to operate their restaurants like individual business owners. That sounds like a great idea. Be accountable for their own P&Ls. Again, sounds like a great idea. And to be rewarded on profit. Remember, this company didn't do that. They didn't reward on profit. They changed the bonus structure to reward them only on their store's results. The new individual profit-focused philosophy contradicted the team connectivity that was part of making their culture and performance so exceptional. So that moment of misalignment, not alone, but combined with leadership changes and other changes, gradually eroded the culture, and the financial performance started to suffer. And so within several years and a few changes in ownership and leadership, including an attempt at a franchise model to keep it afloat, it was no longer in business. So that was a really sad example of seeing something that was thriving so much and seeing some very specific things happen, and it eventually closed. So this example related to a startup, then an acquisition and the strategies that the new leadership put in place, thinking it would grow the business. And I know we're not talking about acquisitions and mergers today, and that's not where you all are. So that aside, no matter what, culture is the job of the leader. And the fortunate part is that's you. You get to be in the driver's seat. Sustainable cultures for the long term, when they're so strong and really thriving, they can transcend years of leadership changes, business challenges, and strategy shifts. Because that's something to think about too, is you creating a culture that can live beyond you one day. If you want your organization to thrive 50 years from now, how do you put this in place where it can do that? So you are in a special position having newer companies and early startup phases to prioritize culture in your strategic planning and those decisions. So I'm going to walk us through a strategic framework and some practical steps. I'm going to share a practical definition of culture and the important role culture plays in organizational performance, a systems approach to designing it, and tips to leading culture for a beautiful business. So let's start with what the heck is culture. As I said, there's so many definitions out there, and you can just get buried with a lot of academic descriptions. But I'm going to give us a few. At the core, the most simple is just to say it's how things work around here. And let's say you're going to someone's house and you see a queue that their shoes are all outside. You're like, oh, that's how things work around here. I don't wear shoes in the house. Take off my shoes. Another definition is it's a commonly held set of values and principles that show up in everyday behavior. So right now, if you're a team of one or two, this is what you're bringing, right? It's your values, it's your principles, and how you show up every day. And even if you don't have employees, you are still interacting with other people, and they are still getting a sense of your culture, whether it's your customers, your vendors, your contractors. I mean, you're on emails, you're on calls, you're having meetings. Just because you don't have employees doesn't mean that you're not a representative of a culture, and that's pinging someone about what it's like to work with you. Another example is shared values, attitudes, behaviors, standards, and beliefs that characterize members of an organization and define its nature. So this version expands values and behaviors with attitudes, standards, and beliefs. The overall nature could be something like, well, are you very entrepreneurial? Are you risk averse? There could be a number of ways to describe it. And again, if you're a team of one or two, you are creating the nature of your business. So as you grow and as you add employees or even extend your working partnerships with other stakeholders, the shared aspect of this becomes really more prominent, right? I mean, if you have a team of 5 people you're working with and you're all on the same page with how your energy and what you're conveying to other people, people will get that that's a shared sense of an organization. But if you're not aligned, it's going to be confusing to the people you work with. And then this is a third one, and this one happens to be my favorite, but I don't want to bias you on one that resonates with you the most. It's the way people function to survive or thrive in an ecosystem. So if we look at the word ecosystem, it is a biological community of interacting organisms in their physical environment. And I'm doing this for physical now because we're on Zoom right now. So the concept of this environment, I think, is a little bit expanded. And it's a complex network of interconnected systems. So this is culture. It is an ecosystem. And if you think about your family at home and all the values, behaviors, and the dynamics in a family, that's a culture. If you hang out with a close group of friends, they're your core gang, and all those dynamics, that's a culture. And I'm also convinced the reason why that show Survivor was so popular, when everyone got thrusted on to wherever they were sent to and had to meet complete strangers and try to figure out how to survive or thrive, they were all creating their own culture, right? Trying to figure out how to win the game. So as you grow and consider adding employees or inviting other people into your world, think about it as an ecosystem. And those people in this ecosystem will pick up on cues, formal or informal, written or unwritten, intentional or unintentional, to figure out how to function. And so this is where your thoughtfulness on how you want to design this so it has more intention and not leaving it to chance is going to set you up for more success. I'll give you just a small example of something that was unwritten, informal cue I got working for a culture. They expected you to work pretty much 24/7 and had to respond to emails or texts regardless of the day or time. And you quickly learn that that was what was expected, and wasn't it written down anywhere. It wasn't ever actually expressed, but you learned that, like, oh no, you better do that. So there were no boundaries, and no one could really establish a line between work and home. And that was so different from our life at Prana, right, Scott? We valued life-work balance, and we knew what that meant. So the after hours or crossing into people's personal time was really reserved for an absolute emergency. And you'd get called out for that if you didn't honor that life-work balance. So these are the 3, 4, so there may be one that kind of resonates with you, but really think about it, because it isn't just like now, like what resonates with me, but as you grow, or as you're talking to other people and they may not understand culture, or they may not understand why you're at the table trying to make sure it's in your strategic planning process, what is something that you feel the most comfortable sharing with other people to influence them to buy into what culture is and why it's important? So think about it in both ways. Well, I love cats. That's why this is here. No, that's not why it's here. But I wanted to share what my experience has been and what culture is and what it's not. Sometimes culture has been really elusive and perceived as fluffy or not relevant. HR people do that. It's about the parties, and it's not. Culture is not cute, fluffy kittens on motivational posters surrounded by employees having parties. It's competitive advantage, 100%. Culture is so important, and it impacts business outcomes. So according to almost 2,000 CEOs and CFOs in a research study conducted by Duke University and Columbia Business School, culture is the most important value driver ahead of the strategic plan, operating plan, CEO, marketing, production, and finance. Gallup research reported that engaged cultures drive performance and not the other way around, and that highly engaged businesses achieve a 10% increase in customer metrics, and you might like this next one, and a 20% increase in sales. Non-thriving cultures are 10 times more likely to be negatively impacted by crisis than thriving cultures. And this is according to a pulse survey conducted by the O.C. Tanner Institute. So of course, we all know COVID-19 was a crisis that even continues to challenge us today, and more than we ever would have imagined. And it's not going to be the only one. There's going to be other crises we face. So having a really thriving culture will help you weather those storms. So to understand culture even more, think about it being a product of these 2 ingredients. And you're in your early phases of growth, so this is the perfect time to kind of have this context, right? So the first ingredient are values, behaviors, and norms. So values are like 10 commandments. They're foundational, they're aspirational, they act as the compass to guide behaviors and decisions. You have your own personal values. Getting really clear on those when you're the size you are is critical, because whether you realize it or not, you're bringing those to your business. And so when you're thinking about growing your business and you want to impart those values and how people are behaving to others when you're not looking, especially, what are those? What do you want to make sure gets perpetuated to make your business a beautiful business? So the behaviors in action, when they're consistent, they're referred to as norms. That's what people are actually doing. On the other hand, the more formal side are the management practices and governance. So these are formal design programs or structures like a hiring or selection or compensation policy. And when you have enough people and you have to think about how do we handle approval procedures or signature authority and things like that, that's what this means too. So how these ingredients work together forms the culture, which then produces the outcome. And in effective cultures, everything is aligned. These ingredients are all aligned. But I want to distinguish between effective and thriving. So in thriving cultures, they're aligned with unwavering commitment and relentless consistency, like truly, and Scott knows this about me, like an obsession.
Indeed.
Are you agreeing?
Totally agree. Got to be obsessed, though.
Obsessed. A healthy obsession, yes. So how do we design it? This is a 7-point strategic framework with steps that I developed. It's kind of been my approach over the years. Remember earlier on, I said I did this earlier in my career and I didn't even realize exactly what I was doing. And then when I put pen to paper, I'm like, I knew exactly what I was doing, and it's quite strategic. So at a high level, if you look at phases 1, 2, and 3, these are all about getting the foundation and core ingredients right. And I'll walk us through those. Phases 4, 5, and 6 are needed to influence the behavior you want. And I want to go deeper on that for a moment. Years ago, early in my career, I was so blessed to take this organizational dynamics class with this brilliant consultant. And one of the things he shared with me just stuck forever. And he was talking about the 3 actions you need to influence behavior. And they were so simple. They were, you need to communicate what you're expecting. You need to role model it consistently. And then you need to reinforce it. And that reinforcement could be positive reinforcements or negative reinforcements, right? That's the accountability. So communicate, role model, and reinforce. So as I've worked with culture, I'm always looking at those 3 things because we're looking for people to show up a certain way. Have we expressed what we're expecting? Are we role modeling it ourselves? Are we making it count? Are we reinforcing that? So I'll share more examples of what that can include. And while I'm showing this visually as like pretty sequential, it's actually not always so linear. So you can keep that in mind as we go. And it does start with the define stage. So that's around establishing and understanding your company's purpose, vision, values, behaviors, and norms. So this is the heart, okay? I always start here, and I think it ties really closely to probably some of the strategic planning conversations you had. You have to be clear on your purpose, vision, and your goals. This isn't even about culture yet. This is about, what are you all about? What do you stand for? Is there a core ideology that drives how you operate? What is the vision and what are you aiming to achieve? So that has to be foundational. If you haven't spent that time on it, anything else you're designing can't be connected to it. The next step then, after that's clear, by the way, if you've already done this work, I would still start here because you always want to make sure you have the clarity and assess if anything's changed. You know, maybe something's evolved and you have some other inspiration and you want to keep it fresh, or maybe you're honing it in a little bit more specifically. And the next step around identifying the behaviors and the values, those tie to your strategy. So if you have 3 goals that are really critical to accomplish in the next 3 years, you really need to think about, like, what are the behaviors we need to make that happen, right? And that's where some of the work takes a little bit of time, but there are some steps for it, right? So these are the suggestions I have for steps. One would be, even if you're a team of 1, involve others who might have valuable insights and talents on here, like someone that you can ping some ideas off of, like, this is where I'm trying to go. You know, what do you think we need? What does that look like behaviorally? You can take time to brainstorm. There's templates to use as guides on this. For those of you who are really introspective and work extremely well alone first, you know, you can do that and then maybe get with someone else to share what you've developed and tweak it from there. So there's ways to do this work, ideally in a facilitated way, but you can still do it on your own to start brainstorming these behaviors and then categorizing them. Let me give you an example. Like, let's say, in order for us to execute on this vision and this mission we have and these goals, we know that we really value service. Service is going to be one of the values we want to be out in front of. To make that specific, you want to think about, like, actually writing it out. We demonstrate service by doing the following. It can be messy work initially, like just write it out like a data dump, and then you can prioritize and hone it and wordsmith later. But what does service really look like in action? If you say you value honoring commitments, what does that look like? And an example there could be, do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. If a commitment can't be fulfilled, notify others early and agree upon a new deliverable to be honored. Like, just spell it out. Because the thing, here's another value I love, integrity, okay? Depending on where you grew up and what your culture could be just personally, what integrity looks like to me and what integrity looks like to you could be really different. So you have to be really specific in what integrity actually looks like behaviorally for you in your business. Okay. Before I move on to the next, any thoughts, questions, comments?
I was curious how much is too much, like you're listing values and what you think your culture is. Can you just clutter it with too much? Should there be a core 4 or like what's?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, I don't want to say that there's a complete rule of thumb, but I will say, if you go back to my communicate, role model, reinforce concept of for behavior, think about what can a human being digest and remember, right? So maybe it's 5 is the right number, maybe it's 10. But then I think there's companies like the Ritz-Carlton, I think they may have 25, right? So it might also depend on, you know, the nature of your business and what you're trying to convey. But I would say a magic number wouldn't be any more than 10. And I think even a more magic number would be 5 to 7 for values and value statements, because beyond that, it's just harder to digest. Okay. Anyone else? No. When I first started working with Prana, and I don't know, Scott, if you remember this phase, but there were values, but they pretty much just had a label, like change, change was one of them, and energy was another. There wasn't a ton of specificity, or there might have been brief statements, but we took more time to add more of an actual description of that behavior to get it even
The key
clearer.
thing, Jen, remember that, is that, remember we asked the next level down to the leadership team, what do you I think the question was, are we living our values? And it
Yeah.
was a bit of a trick question because it turned out nobody knew what the hell the values were. So sort of a reconstruction, or at least taking some of the original concepts and making them a little bit more solidified.
Exactly. Yeah, it was an inside out type of a job. So I'll share some examples of some work here. So at Prana, this was an example of stating what Prana stands for, clothing for positive change, and 3 pillars that were connected to it that ended up being like these organizing principles for some strategy. A caveat to this one, though, is this ended up being quite a bit consumer facing. And I want to make sure I don't confuse you, because a lot of this work on what do you stand for, what is your culture, it really should be an inside look, not a marketing exercise. That said, the connection between your brand and your brand messaging and your culture are so tight. So they should absolutely have a ton of synergy, but they shouldn't necessarily be exactly the same, if that makes sense. In this case, it happened to work because a lot of the ways that I'll show you what the values are in a moment, they really did connect. But this was a little bit more consumer facing. And then Prana, we were very diligent with our strategic planning process. And 5 years out, there was the longer term goals. And these were 4 of the strategic objectives that were more long term. And so each year when there was the annual business plan, we would riff off of these pillars. Okay. And that was very helpful for leaders and employees when they were setting their goals. I cannot emphasize enough, and this is not a goal setting session, I cannot emphasize enough how critical it is that you are clear, not only on your vision and your purpose and what you stand for, but what your goals are. Because that is going to be the connective tissue, the glue that's going to help you as you grow, get people rowing in the same direction in the boat with you and not making it up as they go. Here are the values. We had 6. We had 5, but we had 1 that we added, and part of this whole framework is evolution, right? So positive change, it used to just say positive change, and we had a statement with that, is we take positive steps towards environmental and social change. DEI, we create a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. So you can see that we used an explanatory description of what does this really look like in work. Seva was an interesting word. Seva means selfless service without expecting anything in return. It's a Sanskrit word. And defining that and giving employees examples of what does that really look like when you're working not only with each other, but with your customers, and just the overall community, right? Giving back to the community was part of how Seva was so core to the company's values. All right, we're going to move on to the next phase. So you have gotten clarity on what you stand for, your vision, your mission, your values as a company, the behaviors that align with those values. Next is taking the time to look at what are you doing already that is working for a culture or against your culture. And this is a bit iterative, And I'm going to emphasize again, because if you're only one or two people, you may not think you have a culture, but I want you to pressure test that. You know, you can even start asking people as you're interacting with others that you have people helping you in some way, shape, or form. And it'd be interesting to ask them, like, hey, if you had to describe the culture, even just working with me, what would you say? But as you do this work, one idea is around this culture audit, where literally you can list those values that you defined and those desired behaviors you created. And then you can start identifying actions or behaviors that you know are actually occurring in your world, in your ecosystem, and have kind of a coding system like green, yellow, or red. Green would be, wow, those things that are happening are actually really positive and working for us with the culture we want to create. Red would be the opposite, like that is not working for us. It's in conflict with our values. We need to rethink what we're doing. It's either stop it or change it. And then the yellow might be somewhere in between, like it's a caution area, like something you maybe need to pay attention to, okay? There's also areas that can just be more organic in the moment observations. A brief example of that was, there was a time at Prana when we were getting, well, we were always busy, but it was a different time. It was after the acquisition, and the norms were a little bit different between our parent company. And all of a sudden we started having all of these lunch meetings, and we didn't used to do that. Lunch meetings were not so normal. People would use their time to go exercise or take a break, whatever they needed. It was their personal time. And it was getting out of hand. And it got so bad that even our admins were pulling their hair out because they couldn't take their time off, and that was creating wage and hour issues because they're hourly. And then we were spending a ton more money on food because there's always these lunch meetings. And I was having a conversation with the president at the time about it. And I said, you know, this isn't how it used to be here. And I'm actually a little concerned. And he'd only been with us, I think, less than a year. And he said, wow, I'm so glad you said that. I haven't liked it. You know, he was active. He wanted to go out and ride his bike and do those things too. And then right then and there, we said, well, let's change it. Let's get back to our values and put a line in the sand at that sacred time. So we literally crafted an email and launched some communication to recalibrate that, and basically said, no more. That is sacred time. We're not having lunch meetings anymore unless it's like an absolute emergency. And it was a really good example where you catch yourself in the moment going, that is not the culture we want to create. And it wasn't good for people's well-being, and it wasn't good for the business. People were burning out. So other examples of policies or practices you can think about aligning as you're growing is, if you rely on vendors, what are you doing to nurture that relationship? How is that working, right? Are there things you need to really do to inspire and motivate them to work with you? And what about your customer-facing policies, and how do those align with what you stand for? So remember, think about culture. It's not always about just your employees. It's that entire ecosystem of those hearts and souls you touch. If you need to think about hiring, you know, how do you make sure your employment brand and the representation and your selection process, all of that, how do you make sure it's aligning with what you want for your culture? And how are you factoring in hiring for diversity and values, and also the behavioral fit for those jobs? And then the last example I'll mention here is, how do you make sure your compensation and bonus programs actually incentivize the behavior you want? You know, and are there opportunities to create rituals to signify a value? And mention a ritual in a moment. You know, this is the part where it sounds, there's more formal things that start happening here as you grow. that you want to think about, right? And you may need other expertise to help with it along the way. So my plea to you is, if you do bring in experts at a certain point of your growth to design these things, stay involved. Because too many times I think people just say, oh, well, that's so-and-so's job, they'll just create a policy. This is the obsessed part. I can't even tell you how much a simple policy can conflict with the spirit and the energy and the vibrance you're trying to create in your business. Okay. Scott, even how obsessed I was about the font of that policy. I mean, like the format of that policy. I mean, words are energy. Visuals are energy. I mean, everything should just ooze your brand, ooze your culture. So yes, you need to delegate. You can't do everything on your own, but that doesn't mean not being involved and not just really obsessively making sure it aligns.
Hey, Jen, let me interject something for everybody here, because you made a couple really good points. And I'd love to maybe share my own experience. What's really cool about what you guys are doing is you are starting it and it is your thing. And it will soon become everybody in the company's thing, if you will. And, that was the most fun thing for me in starting Athleta, is like, now we're going to do it differently. Just decide to do it in a way that was sort of in keeping with our own values and with what I had observed other companies were doing, maybe not doing so well. I think that I found in my career going into other companies to do turnarounds or to fix things or to be, hired gun, if you will, which is sort of less fun, is you start to, in some ways, ingest existing values that are kind of dysfunctional. And the thing that's really cool about what Jen said is the person who followed me there is a good friend of both of ours named Russ. And the fact that Jen called this out about the lunch meetings, and he said, you know what, I really don't like that. Let's not do that type of thing. The cool thing about what you're doing is you can actually get it right from the beginning. And it doesn't mean that you don't continually adjust. It's always messy, right? Dylan had posted that thing in the chat around Nike principles. One of the things around that they mentioned in there is just going to be kind of messy, and it's going to be always about change. You can continually adjust, but the cool thing again about what you're doing now is you're starting really from scratch, if you will, and you can sort of set these values in place and set the culture in place as you see fit. So just wanted to pile on to one of the things that you said, Jen.
Yeah, touche. Rituals. There is simplicity and beauty in just little rituals you can do to reinforce what you stand for and your values. This happens to be one that we had at Prana to support the value around life-work balance, and it was the gong.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please take this moment to sit back, relax, and enjoy the gong.
So every day, somewhat between the hours of 3 and 4, we would do this, and everyone would stop working, focus on breathing, stretch. The point was to kind of have a pattern interrupt and just center and focus on some well-being there, a moment of mindfulness for just a minute. It was just a minute. It's amazing how powerful that is for a minute. So there could be some rituals that you can.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please take this moment to sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Now I'm getting the circle. There could be some rituals that you think about that really support what you're all about. I'm going to move along a little fast here, but as you grow, there could be some other things that you do to support your culture. And, when I first started at Prana, we were still pretty small. And there was one team called the Perks team for culture. And their mission was really to find ways to strengthen the culture. So they did a lot. But as we grew and we needed to create more opportunities for more people and make it realistic, we got more specialized in these different employee teams with different types of missions. So you can see them here, but that's another thing that you can think about. But they were very specific, they were very intentional, and when putting it together, they had something to accomplish. So it wasn't just random, if that makes sense. Okay. When I worked for the restaurant company I was talking about earlier, they didn't necessarily have this for employees, but they did it with their customers. So once a month, the founder would randomly pick 10 customers and have a meal with them and almost use that as a mini focus group to learn about what their experience was interacting with the restaurant and the food and the employees. And it was very casual, but it was very clear how customer centric and that value around the customer was by seeing the founder doing this with them. So again, you don't have to, hopefully you're kind of expanding your mindset that it isn't necessarily always about having a team of employees. It could really, invite other people in the ecosystem. And knowing where you are in your stage, I'll cruise through these next ones pretty quickly, but when it's time for you to make your hires, deciding who you bring into your ecosystem, into your world, is such a huge honor and responsibility. And hiring for culture fit should be just as important as considering other experience and technical qualifications and thinking about your hiring philosophy, right? Is your philosophy to hire for culture fit, or just experience, or everything, blending it all? How are you factoring in diversity to open up opportunities? Then again, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but when you get into the hiring phase, there are best practices to follow for hiring to not only make sure you're hiring the most exceptional person, but also one that will thrive in your culture and even make your culture come alive even more. So that is something to be really thoughtful about and be involved in. I mean, when I worked with Scott, he was still involved with interviews at most of the levels for a long time. So again, if you get to a place where you're growing and you may need to have help with who's doing your hiring, don't delegate it so much where you're not involved and you don't get to pick who's going to be in your world, right? And then stage 4 is around this communicating and teaching, right? So now you're hiring people. And by the way, some of that philosophy I should have mentioned going back, it could apply to how you are interacting with your vendors and who you're choosing to even work with, right? You can be picky when you're in charge. In this phase, stage 4, this is about communicating and teaching. And again, this is a bit focused on new hires, but it's the same thing with vendors, contractors, anyone who's working with you. How do you impart what you stand for and what your culture is all about and all those behaviors you're expecting to people early, so they have basically a roadmap to successfully work with you. So this is about integrating, and this is about finding ways to teach them early. Say it early, say it often. So you could have a designated onboarding program, which a lot of companies do, and that's what I've done. You can have ways where you're doing that, creating like a roadmap, something that's either digital or physical that you can give to people. But again, this is so personal for you, right? This is your life. This is, so important for you. So as much as you can be involved as being the teacher or having a role in the teaching of what you're expecting, it's really, really powerful. Here's some examples of, we did an onboarding session with new hires, and we also did it with other key partners that were needing to really know about us. So whenever we work with staffing firms or other types of agencies, we would take time to teach them about our culture so they knew what we were all about. We would share things like this with our employees. You know, we communicated early that culture is a priority. We communicated early that we expected high performance, but we operated in a casual environment. We communicated early that we lead with head, heart, and backbone. And when I would communicate that to people, I would say, you know, we do expect high performance and we will happily reward you for that. But if someone isn't able to keep up, we're going to have that talk too. And all to foster the culture and the environment for everyone to thrive. We went over our values, and we even had sessions where we would ask for examples of how they could live them in their particular roles, right? Even getting it more specific to the jobs they do. And we even articulated more around what the culture is and also what it's not. And by the way, that's kind of a fun exercise to do. It's one thing to say what you are, but on the flip side, if you had to describe what you're not, what would that be, right? So that adds even more additional clarity. I'll mention at the bottom here, the Prana culture, very last bullet, purpose-driven versus profit-only focused. When you talk about profit and money, we know it's important. You're running a business, you have to be profitable. Check, right? That isn't what's going to inspire your people. That's not where you're going to win their hearts. That's not where you're going to get them to give you all their discretionary effort to make things happen. Give them a purpose. That's why all that work in stage one is so important. If you're having company meetings or sharing results, talk about your purpose first, then talk about your profit. You're going to talk about both, but if you do it in that order, I am telling you, you will win their hearts. So we also share that culture is a journey and not a destination. Scott mentioned it evolves, and it will evolve. Culture never stays the same. The things that stay the same are what do you stand for and what are those values, okay? Your strategy may change, some of the rituals may change, some of your programs and practices may change, but the core, the glue are those first couple stages I defined. So as the company grew at Prana and we were acquired and things were shifting, and I would hear employees say, well, you know, the culture is not the same. And I'm like, well, you're right. It's going to evolve, right? So, you know, embracing the fact that it does evolve is important too. And then 5 is all about the role modeling. And this is so important. If you say it's important, they're looking at you. They're looking if you're role modeling it, and you're not going to be perfect. You shouldn't feel like you need to be perfect, but you know, how are you living it? How are you talking about it? How are you experiencing it? How are you bringing it to life? And how are you reinforcing it? I mean, it's just a good check for yourself. If you don't feel like you can actually consistently live it, then it's not the right one. Rethink it. And then this last one, the making it matter, reinforcing it is so important too. Some of these things are formal, the ones I have listed, but again, even the daily conversations you may have with someone in your space now, you can reinforce it through celebration and praise and positive feedback. Or if someone missed the mark, you know, if you have a contractor or a vendor you're really relying on and they're missing the mark, you're obviously having those conversations. So, but as you grow and you're thinking about adding people, there's other ways to build accountability and reinforcement into your programs. Performance reviews. At Prana, we had our values in the performance review and the behaviors describing those, so people were held accountable. Reward and recognition programs around behaviors. I'm going to share an example in a moment. Promoting people who live it. Again, I can't tell you, when you get to the place where you're promoting people, if you start promoting people who everyone knows doesn't seem to live the culture, you are now saying what's important. And then celebrating and sharing successes, storytelling is hugely powerful. And then obviously every day when you see it, say it. Here's examples of employee recognition awards. And these were very strategic and intentional. When we looked at where we were trying to go as a business, and we said, what are those behaviors we need to get there? These are examples of the behaviors we needed to get there. And we took the time to build them out. When I first started, we had the first 3. And then as we were growing and we needed to assess what else do we need to really make sure we can hit these strategic goals, we added the last 2. So again, it's an example of how things can evolve. And there's more details as to why we picked these, but for the sake of time, I'll just say these kind of programs can be really powerful and strategic, very intentional, linking back to everything by design. And this final phase of evolving is just paying attention to a lot of the data around you that you can pull to say what's working and what's not. And even when you're small, let's say you get to a place where you maybe have 3, 4, 5 employees, you can still do like survey monkeys or even have little focus groups or have the kind of culture where you can have open dialogue about what's working. If you have employees who end up leaving you for whatever reason, do exit interviews and find out why. So there's these other things you can do to feed a kind of a feedback loop to go back to what's working and what's not, okay? Here's an example of where we evolved as well. We didn't have enough focusing on DEI. Candidly, we didn't, and we needed to make that change. And so we had a concerted effort to prioritize that in a stronger way in the company. And then other factors that you'll consider, where did it go? Is even your work environment. So, and I get it, like when I work for a team of 2, I mean, we just worked from home and we were figuring out how to share documents. You know, do we use Google Docs or are we just emailing? And, you know, or sometimes we'd have a meeting and we'd figure out where we were going to meet. When I first started working at the restaurant company, they had a warehouse and I had a small desk in the warehouse. So I totally get it. In the beginning, you're just going to work wherever you work. As you grow and you're thinking about how you're going to have a place for people to meet, just consider that work environment and how the work environment itself does have a role in culture and how people work. So there's a functional aspect of work environment and there's a cultural aspect of the work environment. And of course, safety is still on top of everyone's mind. So just some other things to consider. So these are the 7 steps, and I'm almost here at the end. I want to give you some tips on how do you lead the way, okay? One is you have to know yourself. And I don't know how much work you've done on this for you. If you haven't, I completely invite you to dig deep on it. Your personal values, your work style, your drives, your triggers, your own leadership philosophy. Have you taken time to think about that and write it down? Because you need to be self-aware of the impact you have on people around you. And if you need help to figure that stuff out, there are resources, there's exercises to get clear on values, there's assessments to gain insight into your own drives and preferences. Also, just hopefully today, embracing culture as part of your strategy. And also just start where you are. Don't wait to start designing culture with the building blocks until later. Do what you can now. Leverage expertise to build out the plans as you go. I would say start with phases 1 and 2 at the very least, right? Just get clear there. And then have heart, show heart. This is huge. Lead with genuine love and care. And don't be afraid to lead with love and care. Every interaction you have tells a story of your brand and your culture. And people who work with you, they want to work with leaders who are open and genuine and also transparent and vulnerable. So the time couldn't be more perfect for more leaders to show up, leading with love and care. And then don't stop. It's a job that will never stop. It's the blessing that you have being in the position you are. And so do all firms have effective cultures? No, they don't. According to that same study I referenced earlier, with over 2,000 CEOs, more than a third said their companies need considerable work or a substantial overhaul. And then more than half said they need some work. So it's never going to be perfect is the point, but you have some foundation to get started and get started early. So we went through these steps and definition of culture, some of the systems approach, and my framework, and what you can do to lead the way. And I hope it was a huge boost to get you started. And I'll leave you with this quote. Culture is your sheet music to success. It is no different than an orchestra. You can hire the best trumpet players, oboists, violinists, and unless they are playing from the same sheet of music at the right tempo, you will fail. If you have the trumpets playing too loud, the song won't sound right. It's that delicate balance of getting people on the same page. So that is what I have, and I would just love to answer any questions